All right, I want to talk to you today about my favorite subject and the subject that I believe you need to learn most as a new real estate agent, and that is answering objections. You have to be able to answer objections, because if you can't answer objections, you have this smoldering fear with you all the time that, oh, I hope they don't say I have a friend in the business. I hope they don't say our company's too big, or I hope they don't say our company's too small, or I hope they don't say some of the things that I don't know the answer to, because you just don't want that happening. You need to be able to answer objections. Now, before we talk about objections, though, I've got to tell you this. There's a thing called buying signals. Now, what buying signals are things that people say or do that tell you they are ready to buy. A perfect example, and by the way, if any of y'all that came to my 63-hour class, you probably heard me tell the story about the couple that I took them out and showed them the house, and oh, it was fabulous, and had the fabulous master bedroom, and they walked in and they're standing there looking at the fabulous view out of that master bedroom, and they started holding hands. And I point out that holding hands is that's body language, and it's a buying signal. And you need to be tuned into this, but that's another seminar. Also, another buying signal is questions. People don't ask questions about things they're not interested in. You know, somebody decides, I wouldn't buy this house, and they cut the price in half. They're not going to ask you how much are the taxes. Or they decide, I wouldn't list with this guy if he was the only realtor in town. They're not going to ask you how much is your commission or what's the least amount of time you can list a house. When they ask questions like that, they say, Ron, what's the least amount of time you would list a house? Gee, maybe they're thinking, you know, if Ron would list this for a short enough period of time, I might go ahead and list with him. That's exactly what they're thinking. So these are called buying signals. But the strongest buying signal of all is objections. People don't have objections if they're not remotely interested. If they're not remotely interested. And so anytime they're not remotely interested, they're not going to have any objections. Can you imagine you're here in Florida in July, you go out to the used car lot to look at a car, and it has no air conditioning? I don't know about y'all, but I'm not going to say, gee, it's the wrong color. It's got no air conditioning. I'm not remotely interested in the car. Which, by the way, and there's a name for that. That's called a condition. That's called a condition. And there's a thing called a condition, and when you have a condition, there's no answer to it. The answer is just adios amigos. And you'll find that with houses, when you're showing houses. They say, Ron, we would buy this house, but it's not in the XYZ school district. Well, is that a condition or is that an objection? You got to ask them how important that is to you. By the way, one of the ways to ask that question is say, well, listen, if I was on the school board, if I were Superman, I call this the Superman approach. If I was on the school board and I could change the district so that this was in the XYZ district, would you be interested? No, we wouldn't be interested then. Forget about answering the condition. It's, you know, it's not an objection. It's just something to say. And it's probably a condition. If I were out looking to buy a new shirt and all they had was a small, that's not an objection. That's a condition. Are y'all with me? Now, so you got conditions you can't answer, but also you've got a thing called smokescreen objections and real objections. Now, very important that you understand the difference between these two. A real objection is something that is caused by a lack of understanding or a lack of information. And if that problem didn't exist, they would probably go ahead. A smokescreen objection is just something to say. It's just something to say. Ron, we would list with you, but your office is too far away. By the way, Superman approach works well. Well, what if I told you we were opening a new office right down here on the corner and it's going to be open next Monday? Would there be another problem? Yeah, Ron, there'd be another problem. Now, by the way, I told y'all I was raised in South Georgia. My grandpa used to have an old cliche that he said all the time that I thought was a universal cliche. But my grandpa used to say, you can't teach a hog to sing. It wastes your time and it annoys the hog. Well, I thought this was a universal cliche that everybody in the world was familiar with, but as I became an adult, a little more urbanized, I found out that this is somewhat must be a country cliche. However, I did have an experience a couple years ago I want to tell y'all about. I was up in Pickens, South Carolina at an enormous flea market up there they have in Pickens on Wednesday morning. And I was walking around and all the stuff at the flea market in Pickens, South Carolina. And I found a little plaque that said, you can't teach a hog to sing. It wastes your time and it annoys the hog. And it had a little pig on the plaque, and the guy wanted $3 for it. Well, you know, I'm somewhat of a negotiator. I offered him $1. He said no, he'd take $2. I said $1.50 and we got a deal. He said no, $2 or you're not going to get that plaque. Well, I didn't buy that plaque. And you know, that's probably been closer to 5 years ago. And it still makes me mad that I didn't buy it. And I don't know why, but anyway, that was a cliche I learned when I was a kid. But what does it mean? It means this: you can't answer a smokescreen objection. There is no answer to it because it's just something to say. And when you try to answer a smokescreen objection, it wastes your time and it annoys the prospect. So don't even try to answer smokescreen objections. By the way, in the listing business, there's only 2 real objections. You learn 2 answers and you're out of here. That's all you need to know. Now, and I mentioned the Superman approach. If I were Superman, if I was the king of the world, if I had the power to change that problem, and I did change it, would you be ready to go? Now, if the answer to that is yes, that might be a real objection. If the answer to that is no, which 9 times out of 10 it is, it's just something to say. Now, I want to give you a 6-step process. By the way, I'm going to put these on the board. Y'all, by the way, y'all pardon me for not having all kind of modern equipment and everything. I'm here to teach you stuff, not demonstrate how much I know about new technology. But I'm going to erase all of this stuff, and I'm going to write a 6-step process up here on the board that if you will follow this when you answer objections, you will not have any problems. The first step is hear the objection out completely. Hear it completely. By the way, I probably didn't even spell that right, but here's the deal. You've been in the real estate business 6, 8, 10, 12 months, or 6, 8, 10, 12 years. You've heard all the objections there are. So the guy starts to give you an objection. Well, you've already heard it. You got the answer memorized, so you just interrupt him. Well, you're in a bucket of trouble already. I hope you recognize that. So whatever their objection is, hear it out completely. In fact, when they're finished, just kind of wait and hope they'll add a little bit to that. And so hear the objection out completely. Make sure they got it all out. You got the whole objection out. You know, they say, Ron, I'd list with you, but, oh, you need to be hanging on the edge of your chair. Ron, I would list with you, but you said you want 7%, and the guy down the street will do it for 6%. He said he'd do exactly what you were going to do for 6%. And just make sure they're through. Now, by the way, step 2. Step 2 is to understand the objection. understand the objection. You know, a lot of times people say things to me that don't make a bean of sense. They don't make any sense at all. Perfect example, Ron, the price is too high. You know, you go out and show them a house that's worth $300,000, they can get it for $225,000, and they say, the price is too high. The price is too high. What do you mean the price is too high? Well, we don't want to spend that much money. Oh, it's got nothing to do with the property, so don't be out there telling them 21 reasons why the property is well worth the price, because that's not the problem. The problem is them, and you have that all the time with stuff. You know, by the way, people say, oh, Ron, this is in the wrong high school district. You don't even have any kids. Well, we will have one day. You know, maybe it's time for the Superman approach, but make sure you understand the problem. Critically important that you understand the objection. Now, this third step, very important. I call it isolate the objection. But what it really is that the only reason? Is that the only reason? Now, by the way, if you don't master this step, let me tell you what's going to happen to you. If you don't master this step, you're going to get real good at answering objections. And I'll tell you why. You're going to answer one. They'll give you another one. You'll answer it. They'll give you another one. You'll answer it. They'll give you another one. You'll wear yourself out answering objections. What you need to do is when they say, Ron, we would list with you, but the guy down the street says he'll do it for 6% and you want 7%. Oh, okay. I got it. So, well, let me ask you a question. Is that the only problem? Oh, yeah, Ron, we think you're great. You're a super realtor. Your program looks wonderful. Your presentation was fabulous. And, yeah, but the other guy says he'll do it for 6%. Now, this next step, I call it explain it back. Explain it back to them. You could say sell it back to them. Because a lot of times they say, Ron, I'd list with you. So what you're saying is you like my program. Is that right? Yeah, Ron, we love that program. And you feel like I can get your house sold? Yeah, at the price that we talked about? Yeah. Only thing is the other guy says he'll do it cheaper and you feel like you're getting the same thing from him. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Now, step 5 is to answer the objection. Now, by the way, I'm assuming you know how to answer the objection. And you should sit down with your sales manager, with some senior salespeople. I mean, this should just be like a weekly thing, is just sit around and talk about objections. You know, you get 4 or 5 salesmen together, and you don't have to be Mr. Master Sales Trainer to do this. Anybody can do this. Because here's what happens. I don't know about y'all, I've done this a dozen times. As I'm walking out to the car with an unsigned listing, I say, well, here's what I should have said. Well, because see, it's easy to think up the answers to objections in a training room. It's hard to think them sitting at somebody's kitchen table. If that's the first time you've ever thought about the answer to the objection, it's too late. So, but you should have all the answers to all the objections that there ever were just pretty much memorized. I mean, why would you not? It just makes too much sense. And especially this one, because like I said, there's only 2 objections. There's only 2 objections in to listing. There's only 2 legitimate reasons why somebody would not list with me. Number 1, the guy down the street will do it cheaper. By the way, you think that's a real objection? You know, is that a real objection? Yeah, it sure is. Let me show you all the answer to that objection. If you don't get anything else out of this but this, you got your money's worth. And because you hear that objection absolutely a lot. You hear that objection a lot. Ron, the guy down the street said he'd list the house cheaper. Okay. I can appreciate that. And, well, let me ask you this. By the way, Superman. You know, I'm one of the senior salesmen in the office. Probably if I went in and begged the sales manager and, you know, asked him, you know, could I list your house at 6%? Maybe I could talk him into it. And if I did that, are we ready to go? Would you go ahead and list with me? Yeah. By the way, if it's okay with your company to list houses at 6%, you got it made. Of course, what if it was 5% or 4%? You know, it's a funny thing how we all depend on our background. When I was a young man, 21, 22, 23 years old, I learned to sell in the automobile business. I learned to sell in the automobile business, and one of the things that we did in the automobile business is Jim Brown, the sales manager, told me, he said, Ron, if they say they'll give you $100 for that car, you write it up and bring it to me, and I'll turn it down. And so that was the way I learned to sell. And so, you know, we had a car, a guy wanted to trade cars, cost $1,000, $2,000 to trade cars. And he said, well, I'll trade with you for $1,000. Well, it took $2,000 to make the deal, so that wasn't even close. But I would write him up, get his name at the bottom of the page, go take it into Jim Brown, who'd been selling for 25 years, and Jim would come in and get them up to an acceptable price, and we'd end up trading cars. I don't understand why realtors don't do this. You know, if you're out there and they say, Ron, I'd list, or no, they say, rookie Ron, I'd list with you 2%. Sign them up, take them into the sales manager. Sales manager says, we can't list a house at 2%. Well, boss, would you call him and tell him that? The boss calls him on the phone and gets him up to 6% or 7% or whatever y'all need to get to make ends meet. I don't see why people don't do that all the time, but as far as I know, nobody does that. Anyway, getting back to what we got to do. Mr. Seller says, Ron, I'd list with you at 7%. I know he said I'd list with you at 6%, but I won't list with you at 7% because the guy down the street will do it at 6%. I said, well, okay, I can understand that. But let me explain something to you about real estate that you may or may not know. Imagine, if you will, it's a hot summer afternoon. Here's Mr. Realtor riding around in his car. He's got two prospects in the back seat. He comes into your neighborhood. He sees a crossroads. Here's one road going down here. Here's one road going up here. Here's your house listed with somebody else for $300,000. Here's another house almost identical to yours listed at $300,000. Now imagine, if you will, this house, Mr. Realtor sitting there at the intersection. First thing he does, he looks down at the listing there, and he notices that this house is a 6% commission. That's $18,000. He can do that arithmetic in his head, I promise you. He sees an $18,000 commission. He knows that $9,000 of that is going to come into his office. He knows that $9,000 of that's going to come into his office, and he's probably on about a 50% split with the broker, so he's going to earn about $4,500. So he looks up there and he sees a $4,500 commission. Well, at the same time, he looks at the other listing. He sees a $300,000 house at a 7% commission. He sees that being $21,000. He knows he's going to get about half of that coming into his office, which is $10,500, and he's on a 50% split, so he's going to probably make about $5,250. Well, I apologize that realtors work for money, but they do. So he's going to look down here, and he's probably going to show this house first, and he's probably going to show it most enthusiastically. Now, a lot of realtors tell you they don't do that. Well, I don't know. I will tell you this. In Orlando, Florida, listings rarely expire at 7%. And I think I can almost say they never expire at 7.5%, because this is reality. Now, do you want your house shown first, or do you want your house shown most enthusiastically, or do you want it shown as a last resort? And I think we both know the answer. You want it shown first, you want it shown most enthusiastically, and this is just human nature. It's got nothing to do with realtors. We're all that way in everything we do, and there's nothing wrong with that. By the way, the last step is close. Mr. Seller, if that makes sense to you, put your name right there at the bottom of the page, and we'll get a sign out by tomorrow and probably have y'all moved by the end of the month. That's the way answering objections works, folks. And you've got to be able to answer this objection because there's always somebody willing to do it cheaper. There's always somebody willing to do it cheaper. So you need to be able to do that. But a lot of different ways to answer objections. By the way, a lot of different ways to do number 5, but here's what I want you to know. You got to do this first, this second, this third, this fourth, before you get to number 5. There's no big hurry to get there. It's just so you get there. So make sure you hear the objection. Make sure you understand it completely. Is that the only reason? Yeah. So what I understand you saying is, and you get agreement to that, and then you answer the objection. Now, let me give you a handful of ways for answering objections. By the way, this is older than selling. This is older than the printing press, I'm sure. But in the answering objection business, I know how you feel. Others have felt that way before until they found blah, blah, blah. Feel, felt, found. You can do this in one little short sentence, or you can do it in a story. By the way, stories are just the absolute, there's nothing better than stories. Stories are great. By the way, here's an objection. You're showing a house. Young couple says, Ron, I think we'd like to think this over overnight and let you know tomorrow. Is that a real objection? We want to think it over overnight. So let me make sure I understand what y'all are saying. You feel like there's some information that you will gain tonight that you don't have right now? Is that pretty much your situation? They say, no. Yeah, that's pretty much it, yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. If you called me tomorrow and said you wanted this house and it was gone, would you be upset? Yeah, we probably would. So what I hear you saying is you want somebody else to make the decision for you. Is that right? Sometimes they answer their own objection. In fact, most of the time they answer their own objection. You don't want somebody else to answer your own objection for you. Y'all remember the pig story I told you a few minutes ago? See, I told you that story for a reason. And you might think that's a stupid little story. And it is a stupid little story. But is there a point to that story? See, I couldn't make a decision to spend 50 more cents for a stupid little plaque that 5 years later, I wish I had that stupid little plaque. I've never seen one before, and I've never seen one since. And see, that's a cool thing about real estate. You're never going to see another house like this ever again that's exactly like this. In this neighborhood, on this corner lot, with these features, at this price. And so you need to explain that to people. So you might answer that objection. I forgot what the objection was. The objection was, we want to think about it overnight. Don't let somebody else decide for you like somebody else decides for me. By the way, I could tell you that same story, and you've all done this. By the way, see, you don't need my story about the stupid little hog plaque at the Pickens, South Carolina flea market. You've all had that experience. You've had that experience. But what happens is you have that experience and you just kind of discount it. What I want you to do is when you have that experience, have you ever been somewhere, a store, they got an outfit, you just love it, you decide not to buy it, 3 hours later you go back to get it and there's somebody walking out the door with it, you know? I've had that experience. I've had it with you name it. I've had that experience. Take those stories, put them in your memory bank, and when you need a story, you can answer objections with stories. And because, by the way, the hog plague story, I got 10 stories just like that. Y'all come to my 45-hour class, let me tell you the long version, the rocking chair story. Told that story so many times, but stories, they're just great. Because when you tell a story, you always take the person that's in the story and they're either the hero or they're the zero. By the way, if the person in the story is a zero, that's called high pressure. It's kind of a negative approach. Now, sometimes it works. What's better is when the person in the story is a hero and the person in the story is a hero. Nobody even notices that because, see, people put themselves in the story where they belong. People put themselves in the story where they belong, whether it's the wife or the husband or whomever. But stories, practice some stories. Write them down. Memorize them. Tell them over and over. I tell stories that I've told for 20 years. And I tell them pretty much the same, or maybe I improve as time goes by. By the way, you don't need to make up stories. You think I made up that hog story? Who could make up a story like that? So you don't need to make up stories. And for crying out loud, if you are going to make one up, don't make it up sitting at the guy's kitchen table. That won't work. But get some stories that happen. So, by the way, another step 5, whatever they say, that's the very reason y'all should go ahead and do this. By the way, a lot of times this goes into stories. I have a story, people say, oh, Ron, we can't quite afford these payments, they're too big. I got a great story about that. It's a long story. And by the way, with long stories, they better be interesting or you'll lose their interest. And so tell stories and practice answering questions. By the way, a lot of times there's a thing, called a hot button. People are going to buy the house for whatever reason. You're showing a guy a house in downtown Windermere. He said, Ron, the roof leaks. Yeah, but it's in downtown Windermere. Ron, it's overpriced. Yeah, but it's in downtown Windermere. Ron, this is wrong. Yeah, but it's in downtown Windermere. And if they want to be in downtown Windermere, guess what? They're going to buy it because it's in downtown Windermere. And a lot of times, that's what the deal is, and whatever it is. Now, anyway, I hope y'all follow this. And like I say, get together with your peers, get together with your sales manager and say, boss, what's the answer to this objection? And practice it in the training room. Then go practice it out at the kitchen table or out on the street somewhere. But y'all get out there and start listing some houses. I hope I've said something today to motivate you to get out there. Go back and watch the for sale by owner tape. Go back and watch the expired tape. Go back and watch the call foreclosure tapes. And get face to face with some prospects. You're never going to get good at this if you don't practice it on real live people. And that's it. So I'm going to close. Y'all come to my 45-hour class at Climber School of Real Estate, and we'll teach you some more stuff about answering objections and prospecting and everything. You got to take that class somewhere before you renew your license. By the way, I'm doing this tape in January. Take your license, look at it, see when it expires. You sure don't want that thing expiring without taking that class, because if it does, you're null and void, in which case we'll see you back in the $220 class, and you don't want to be doing that.